Hello and welcome to Creation Questions. My name is Wes, and today we're going to be going over a video from the YouTube channel Majesty of Reason, run by a philosophy YouTuber named Joe Schmid. And we're just going to be responding to some criticisms about the Kalam cosmological argument. And then, maybe at some point, if Sam wants to come up, we can talk about the transcendental argument, the tag, as it's called, from Cornelius Van Til, and he can sort of run me down on the logistics of that one. So without further ado, I will share my screen, and this video is entitled How William Lane Craig Misrepresents the Science. Okay. Excuse me 1 second. Okay, that should be good. Ready for action. Cool. This video, by the way, was recommended to me by a viewer of the channel. I don't have their name up, so I can't. Let me see if I can pull up that real quick. I believe their user is at Chasset79. So this was posted a day ago, or about like 20 hours ago, talking about. Basically, he says, quote, "It's always baffled me how blithely theists can grant the existence of a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, omnipotent, uncreated mind, like they're talking about something obvious." He goes on to say about how the Kalam, every objection to the Kalam that he's ever heard succeeds. So we're going to respond to some of these objections today. He offered this as one of the options, so hopefully we can we can see if these objections stand. These three people, I believe, are all credentialed philosophers, so this will be an interesting conversation. So let's get started.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Majesty of Reason. I'm Joe Schmid, and today we're joined by Dr. Daniel Linford and Phil Halper to respond to a recent video from Dr. William Lane Craig on the Kalam cosmological argument. Dr. Daniel Linford is an instructor at Old Dominion University. His research focuses primarily on the philosophy of physics and philosophy of religion. His dissertation, entitled Cosmic Skepticism and the Beginning of Physical Reality, which I've linked in the description, you can all freely read it. The dissertation is extremely relevant to today's discussion because therein, Dan gives a comprehensive and, in my view, quite convincing case that science alone should leave us agnostic about whether all of physical reality had a beginning. And he also, of course, covers and responds to some of the philosophical arguments for the beginning of the universe as well. Turning now to Phil. Phil Halper is a YouTuber who has interviewed loads of the world's leading cosmologists on his YouTube channel, which I've also linked in the description. He's a fellow at the Royal Astronomical Society, and in addition to a number of published articles, he has a book coming out. So, Phil, could you say a little bit about that book before we dig into the William Lane Craig video?
Yeah, sure. So it's kind of very loosely based on my video series called Before the Big Bang, where, as you said, we interviewed Stephen Hawking, Roger Penrose, loads and loads of leading cosmologists, and then one of them is Niayesh Afshordi, who has worked on several cosmological models of the early universe. It's quite rare. Not many people do that. And we started chatting and we said, well, let's do a book of this. The book's quite different to the video series. There we just tried to explain the science, but it's more, we hope to have a bit more drama and more storytelling, and also models that we didn't cover in the video series. So I'm really excited. It's called Battle of the Big Bang, New Tales of Our Cosmic Origins. It's published by the University of Chicago Press, and it's already available for pre-order on their website. But I have to say, I haven't been pushing that yet because we haven't got a cover. It's not coming out till next spring. So I actually going to push it officially like when the cover comes out, maybe. But yeah, that's the book. We're really excited about it. I can't wait for you to read it.
Awesome. And I will be putting a link to pre-ordering it in the description. All right. So as I said earlier, we're going to be responding to this recent video that Dr. Craig put out. It's called Fixing the Kalam Cosmological Argument from a couple days ago. And yeah, let's just dig in and we'll just periodically pause it and respond.
Bill, occasionally I look around to see if there are any recent responses to the Kalam cosmological argument. I found 2 on YouTube, so I have some video clips for you to check out. You may be a little disappointed, Bill. I don't think there's anything that new in these, but we'll look at them. The first set of clips is from science communicator Grayson Hawk. This video has over 2,500 views. He claims he can fix the Kalam so that it's more accurate. So let's check out his first clip.
Being a science communicator on YouTube who talks to a lot of theist apologists, I very often hear the Kalam cosmological argument for the existence of God. Except that it's not exactly an argument for the existence of God, popularized by William Lane Craig, very, very famous Christian apologist. Covered him on the channel before. 1, all things that
This video is getting very fractal.
begin to exist have a cause. 2, the universe began to exist. 3, the conclusion, therefore the universe had a cause, which the observant viewer may notice is actually not an argument for the existence of God. Now, there's a lot of introduction of some more assumptions, a lot of mental gymnastics to go from the universe had a cause to that cause was a personal, all-knowing, all-loving, all-good God. But yeah, that's what the Christian apologists are trying to do. The primary Kalam argument just concludes with that conclusion that the universe did have a cause.
Well, so he calls the conceptual analysis of the cause mental gymnastics, Bill.
Yes. What he does is he presents half of the argument and then says it doesn't justify the final conclusion. Well, that is, of course, because it's incomplete as he presents it. If anything, he should accuse me of oversimplifying a much more complex argument, which involves a derivation of the properties of the first cause that show that this cause must be a first, uncaused, beginningless, timeless, changeless, spaceless, immaterial, enormously powerful, personal creator of the universe, which I think is a legitimate and sufficiently robust concept to qualify as a concept of God.
Later on in this video, Craig complains that people should really be responding to, they should understand when an objection has been raised before, and they should be conversant with the literature on that response. Now, in this particular instance, Craig is rightly, so on the one hand, here's what Craig is doing right. He's right that the Kalam argument is not just those 2 premises and that conclusion. Though, to be fair, I often refer to that as the Kalam argument. There's a second stage to the Kalam argument that Craig and others often include, and that's this argument that not only must there be a cause of the universe, but the cause of the universe must have various attributes, and that those attributes are the attributes of God, and therefore we should think that God created the universe. Now, in terms of responding to objections that are already out there in the literature, well, you have a previous video, but as do other people have previous year sources showing why we don't find the second stage of the argument convincing. And it seems like, it seems like Craig himself is being dismissive here with the complaint that's being raised. I mean, the complaint, I think, should be something like, look, the strongest case that there is for this argument is for the first stage. But the second stage of the argument is usually seen as being extremely weak. And insofar as the second stage is weak, then the argument doesn't really establish, even if the first stage is successful, the argument does not successfully establish that God exists.
So I would also point out that we made a video on the Kalam cosmological argument. And we had a lot of the world's leading scholars, philosophers, physicists, a lot of the physicists that Craig quotes. Now, Craig did a 4-part reply, and then we did a reply again. This video is again got a lot of leading scholars in it, and he hasn't replied to that. So I do question why he's replying to this video and claiming, oh, nothing new here. That video got 2,500 views. Our reply video, I can't remember, 70 something thousand views. But even if it had 1,000 views, the fact is we got a lot of leading scholars to reply to him, and he hasn't replied back. So
Right.
I don't think they can complain about, oh, nothing new here.
I think the one thing that could be said here, to be fair to Craig, is that I don't think that he picks out these videos himself. I think this may be a video that the other gentleman in this video picked out. At least that's the way they're portraying it, right? Like this other guy found this and showing it to Craig.
I think, Dan, that he clearly must have seen, if he did 4 videos replying to our video, and he's also made other videos replying to our video. I think he's done at least 7 videos replying to stuff on my channel. It's hard to believe he didn't watch a reply video. I find that hard to believe. Also, of course, we made the video with you we have this show called The Sci-Fi Show. It's me, Dan, and Alex Malpass. And we did a show on one of Dan's papers. It was called The Interface Dilemma. And that is a new argument. I don't think you see that argument in a lot of atheists or counter-apologetics. Now, you might say, well, maybe he didn't see that video. Okay, maybe he didn't, but it's published in the literature.
Well, but I think he has seen that, from what I understand, and I may be wrong about this, but from what I understand, Craig plans to respond to that paper in his forthcoming book on systematic theology. So
that's fair. Okay,
we'll be seeing. So I think we will be seeing a response from him in the future to that.
Okay, that's fair enough.
Yes, and you can stay tuned. You guys can stay tuned to the Majesty of Reason for a response to that as well. So it'll be, we're going to prove the existence of actual infinities by making infinitely many responses and counter responses. That's what's going to happen. Okay, so yeah, that
we're going to do uncountably infinite responses.
Right. No, exactly. So I just wanted to plug, the earlier video that Dan and I made responding to. So, Craig makes these animated videos, kind of animating these various arguments that he's defended for God's existence. And I did one with Alex Malpass on the kind of Hilbert's Hotel and philosophical case. And I also did one with Dan on the kind of scientific case, and also stage 2. We talked about the various inferences that Craig just mentioned to allegedly divine attributes. And Dan and I basically raised criticisms and various problems for almost every single inference that Craig tries to make. So audience, check that out if you're interested. But how about we get back to the Kalam cosmological argument video.
Here's the next clip where he attempts to fix the first premise. Let's go to that.
Is that a good argument? No, it's not a good argument. I have really big issues with both premises. I think that both premises are not true, or at least not justifiably true. So I thought, you know what? Let's try to take a crack at fixing the Kalam cosmological argument. Let's go into each one of these flawed premises and fix them to make them true. And let's see if that alters the conclusion at all, shall we? Let's find out. So premise number 1, all things that begin to exist have a cause. Sometimes alternatively worded that whatever begins to exist has a cause for its existence. What are some examples of things that have begun to exist, right? Like we could just throw out a random example, like a chair, like the chair I'm sitting on right now. That's a thing. A chair is a thing. This chair is a thing. And it began to exist, right? Somebody put together this chair or was assembled at a factory. The wood is made primarily of carbon atoms, and those carbon atoms already existed in the air, in the carbon dioxide in the air. That's where the tree got the material to make the wood, and so on and so on and so on. You can continue to trace this chain all the way back, and you will not find a verifiable instance where you can say, yes, this is when this thing began to exist. The creation.
So he's going to say that a chair didn't begin to exist. And we've gone over this before, but, oh, and by the way, if you're paying attention, this is the first actual criticism of the Kalam. This is the first actual criticism so far in this video. And it's by Grayson, and he's saying, basically, it's a reductionist nominalist view that see like the components of the chair, they've already existed, therefore the chair never really began to exist. And the problem with this is that basically if you take a nominalist view about any particular thing in reality, then you can't define it, because as soon as you define it, you're putting it in a class of things, in a larger class of things, in which it no longer just has its changeable phenomenological characteristics, but it now has noumenal real characteristics that transcend that particular chair, for instance. And basically to say that a chair, like to be sort of a objective nihilist, is to basically disregard how we intuit things, how we understand language. It's basically to ignore information, to ignore forms and functions. And you're kind of like shooting yourself in the foot for any other kind of philosophical inquiry. You're basically just admitting that a materialist cannot substantiate any kind of metaphysical claims. That's what you're doing. You're not actually making an argument against the Kalam. You're making an argument against naturalism on accident. So, and just to, I think I could preempt. I'm just going to let it play though.
Of the chair was not some ex nihilo creation out of nothing. It was just a rearrangement of previously existing parts. But in fact,
yeah, and here's the interesting thing. So we have inferential data, right, of the natural world. Things come into being via pre-existing parts. Their components are pre-existent. Therefore, it's not an ex nihilo creation, but there is actually things that we observe that are ex nihilo creations. Like, for instance, we have concepts, we have ideas. And where do concepts come from? Because if reductionism is true, you should be able to like break up a concept into its constituent parts. You should be able to find the matter that makes up like the specific neurons firing. How does that physically relate to the concept? And this is what's called the hard problem of consciousness in science. Basically, what it's stating is there is this disconnect between the components, the physical components of the brain, and the understanding, the comprehension of reality that consciousness has. So there's a disconnect here. And to say essentially that it's sort of like you can boil it down to material, then like what are the particular atoms that constitute an idea, right? Like when I think of something, I've then created an image. Like you could think of like a pink elephant on a pogo stick. This thing exists now, and I've also caused it to exist in your mind. But where did it come from? Like before that concept was here, it didn't exist at all, right? And there's a sense in which like that is essentially what we mean by a mind creating, like has this creative capacity in like sort of like the sufficiency arguments from contingency. And if we're going back to the chair, even a chair requires this higher level, as like Polanyi is gonna call it, a higher level of like form and function, things that the yes, like Mr. Green is saying, according to Hawke's logic, nothing had a beginning. Exactly, nothing has a beginning according to him. Everything is literally nothing, and you can't have any differentiation of any kind. And that just it doesn't it just leads to absurd conclusions about reality, which are just, they destroy any kind of comprehensibility. So continuing on,
I would say there are zero examples of that, zero verifiable examples of anything coming into existence from nothing.
Again, we have concepts, we have ideas, and those things, where do they come from if not from the mind, the agent, right? And they can't be external to a mind, because we know that even in like the Platonic forms, for instance, we're looking at Plato and the Socratic dialogues, like I believe in is it Meno, I think, is the dialogue where Socrates is kind of going over the how the forms can be recollected, right? Well, the forms if the forms can be recollected, that implies there's some sort of contingency with the mind. Like for instance, he talks about justice? Like, what is justice apart from the interaction of two causal agents, two agents with free will? What is justice apart from that? So the whole concept of forms, the whole concept of ideas and concepts, that they all require a mind. They're contingent on a mind. And so you can't say that a mind cannot create things ex nihilo, because actually in our experience that's exactly the case.
I also noticed in the comments of this video, Bill, that people are saying that matter is neither created nor destroyed, just transformed. The first law of thermodynamics.
This response involves a fundamental confusion of efficient causality and material causality. An efficient cause is that which brings the effect into being. So take the chair. The chair is brought into being by a carpenter. And so the carpenter is the efficient cause of the chair, which
exactly. There needs to be some explanation for X, Y, or Z that is in itself fully accounting for the result. So like what he's saying is absolutely correct. It's not an inferential scientific materialistic claim like Hawke thinks it is. It's a metaphysical claim. So just pay attention to that
begins to
differentiation.
Exist. The chair also has a material cause, namely the wood and the carbon atoms of which it's made. And the fact that the chair has a material cause in no way suggests that the chair itself doesn't begin to exist. The chair is not past eternal, even if the carbon make it up pre-exist the chair.
Yeah, so Craig seems to think that Grayson's objection here is that the nothing begins to exist because everything has a material cause. Everything is made from pre-existing, or everything we have ordinary experience with is made from pre-existing materials. And so Craig thinks that Grayson is arguing that this means that nothing actually or really begins to exist. But that's not what Grayson is arguing. And if you watch Grayson's video, that's not what Grayson ends up saying. So, Grayson is quoted here as saying a few things that make it sound as though that's what he's saying. But really, what Grayson is saying is that what it means for something to begin to exist is that it is produced from pre-existing materials. Now, if Craig were right that to begin to exist, if Craig were right that Grayson were arguing that nothing begins to exist, then in fact what Craig should have said is that Grayson is not presenting an argument against the causal principle, because the causal principle, so if nothing began to exist, then the causal principle that anything that begins to exist has a cause would just be trivially true, right? So if nothing at all begins to exist, well, then it's true that of all of the things that do begin to exist, that they have a cause. It's vacuously true or trivially true. But what I think Grayson really is arguing is that either we understand the causal principle as a principle about things begin to exist in this, what Grayson takes to be an ordinary sense, which is that everything we've experienced with is produced from some pre-existing stuff, or we interpret the causal principle as having to do with creation ex nihilo, in which case the causal principle is just unjustified because we have no experience with things that begin to exist ex nihilo.
So interesting. So both those things, those criticisms that he's bringing up are actually false, because as I just explained, yes, we do observe in our day-to-day, we do observe things being created ex nihilo. We observe ideas, concepts. We have imaginations, right? We even naming things, that is a creative act. And where did the name come from before you just make up the name, right? It's coming from your mind. And that doesn't necessarily mean there isn't a causal chain related to how you come up with certain, concepts could be related to your experience. But at the end of the day, that particular concept that you made is completely and wholly distinct from any other conceptual components that make it up, right? Like, for instance, I can think of a particular blue cup, and sure, I've had experience with all sorts of cups, but that particular blue cup, that concept that I just invented, that idea that I just created, that is completely distinct and is so wholly separate from the components of any of the other concepts of cup. And this is even better illustrated by using the example of the chair, because you can think of something like a sofa or a wooden stool or a plastic lawn chair. All of these examples of chair, they fit into that category of chair, but it's not because of that's not because of what they're made up of. It's because there was a mind dictating that they're in a certain class of things, right? And it doesn't make the class wrong, or it doesn't make the class superficial or nominal. It means that minds are precisely the thing that dictates what, the genus or the species of something is. And that basically that's a great argument for why, the whole universe necessitates a mind. So that's actually a component of the Kalam that isn't often expressed, but you do need a mind to hold all these concepts, because our own brains can hold concepts like 2 + 2 = 4, or like it's wrong to murder, or some sort of concept of a triangle, or some sort of logical thing like the law of identity or non-contradiction. All these sort of a priori synthetical judgments, they don't exist. They're not your mind is not sufficient to hold these things, because they're true whether or not you're thinking that they're true. So you need something greater. You need a mind. And that's part of the sort of extrapolations of the Kalam cosmological argument, and most cosmological arguments or contingency arguments for God are going to have some variation of sufficient or efficient cause, right? As William Lane Craig is talking about. So continuing on.
So so Grayson thinks that the causal principles.
I believe Young Hawk believes in determinism. Yeah, and that would have to follow, right? That would have to follow.
Either irrelevant to the conclusion or unjustified. That's the way I think we should be understanding what Grayson is saying. Now, I don't think that we really should understand the causal principle in that way. I think that we should understand the causal principle to be the principle that everything that
Okay. Forgive me. Shamima 5679 says, is it true the Kalam came out of Islam, specifically is that Sufism, is it called? I don't know exactly the branch. I know it did come out of medieval Islamic thought during the golden age of that. I'm not sure of the spelling. Yeah, that'd be I could look it up real quick, just 1 second. So I'm not sure exactly about that. It says I'm gonna butcher this name, but it's there's a source from the 1400s, 1406, Ibn Khaldun, which he talks about the Kalam, I guess, arose from the fact that disagreements about the details of the doctrines of faith arose in the period after the first Muslims. Most of these disagreements were, in his opinion, caused by ambiguous Quranic verses. So they were trying, I guess, maybe part of it is trying to establish the nature of God. Shamima. Okay, thank you. That's a difficult name. Okay, I'm not reading that one. Evening. Good evening, Bindi. Okay, we're gonna continue on. Oops.
Begins to exist has an efficient cause. And if that's the way that you understand the causal principle, we're here, by the way, begin to exist. It's just taken the broadest sense possible. Whether it begins to exist from pre-existing materials or from nothing at all, the causal principle claims that things have efficient causes. Now, I think there's another kind of reason that you might object to that principle, which is close to what Grayson is saying. You might point out that that interpretation, that the causal principle under that interpretation is no more well justified than another principle that I'll call the material causal principle, according to which everything that begins to exist has a material cause. And if that principle is just as well justified as Craig's causal principle, well, then they stand or fall together. Right? If it's really true that that Craig's causal principle is no more justified than the material causal principle, then if we should reject the material causal principle, we should likewise reject the causal principle. Or if we should accept one of those, we should accept the other. But if we do accept both, then then we should reject the conclusion of the Kalam argument, because the conclusion would require that there be no material cause or no pre-existing material from which the physical universe is made.
Yeah, and you could also even slightly weaken, so we could consider a weakened material causal principle, which just says that whenever something begins to exist, we could even restrict it to whenever material things begin to exist. And moreover, we could restrict the principle in a further way to say whenever material things begin to exist, they have a material cause if they have an efficient cause at all. And that's an even further weakened principle, which is just as arguably well supported by our inductive universal experience.
So, like I've said before, I mean the problem with saying the tying of the material cause with the sort of sufficient cause of the first premise of the Kalam cosmological argument, is that you end up confusing two different kinds of cause, and it's fine to differentiate them. And I think the point that William Lane Craig is making is Grayson is looking at the wrong causal kind, the wrong species of kind in the genus, the wrong species, yes, of the genus of causes, because there, as Aristotle talks about, there are many kinds of causes, and like even Aquinas talks about, like there is a sort of like a first cause, or a final cause, which would be the explanation where everything goes back to that cause. And there's going to be other kinds of causes, like what are the components of this? What is it made of? There are reasons, like why was this made? That's a kind of cause. So it's important to get in our heads what kind of cause that Kalam is talking about. Specifically, it's talking about a metaphysical cause. And that metaphysical cause is sort of like related to the principle of sufficient reason. So yeah, like I guess the main problem with trying to tie the material cause with the metaphysical cause is that there are two different and equally coexistent explanations. Okay, I'm getting some chats here. Are there links between Islam and Jesus, or did Islam come later? So yeah, of course. I mean, like Jesus is, in Islamic doctrine, is a prophet. And so there are definitely links there. Islam did come later, I think. Don't quote me on this, but I think it's somewhere around like 400, 500, somewhere around there. Okay. I think you would return for your. Oh yeah, no problem. Have you ever looked at the work of Dan Winter? No. I'll take a look. If you want, you can link something in the comments and I'll react to it. Okay, continuing on.
As the original causal principle. To many people, it seems just as intuitively plausible as the causal principle. I mean, just as we wouldn't take seriously someone suggesting that, a log cabin in the woods just sprang into being uncaused without an efficient cause, likewise, we wouldn't take seriously someone saying that they kind of just conjured into being, via their efficient causal power, a log cabin without making the log cabin from any pre-existing materials. We would take...
Right, but, and then the problem is though, why would you create a log cabin, right? And you create a log cabin for a specific function, so therefore it has a form. It's made to, be a place to protect yourself from like the elements, be a place where you can like rest. So to have some sort of, to say that because material is involved in creating a log cabin, that there wasn't any sort of agency involved is kind of a lackluster response, honestly. So I'm going to continue and see, like, maybe I'm mixing up like what they're trying to say here. Maybe someone has a in the comments, maybe someone has an idea of what he's trying to get at here.
That to be absurd as well. So
I think it's relevant to say what Craig's alternative is that God spoke the universe into existence. And if we can reject, that it didn't have a cause because of our everyday experience, I can reject that someone can speak something into existence.
See, the problem with this is that actually the only way for something to exist is for there to be something, for it to be spoken into existence. Like, what is anything in the world except for sort of like our description of a concept, and it's like it's related to its teleology, it's related to the information involved there, it's related to how we perceive it, right? So like going back to ideas, concepts that I make up, I have like my conception of a pink elephant on a pogo stick. Where does that exist? Is that real? Like, if we're looking at the works of someone like J.R.R. Tolkien, in the Lord of the Rings, are hobbits real? I mean, they're real in the story. And in a sense, that's similar to, although not totally equivalent to, because God is sort of this omniscient, omnipowerful, omnipresent being that's outside of time, space, and matter. It's sort of similar to how God can conceive of the universe, right? If we're contingent on him, that's similar to how a concept in our minds is contingent on our minds, right? It's even contingent on like whether we decide to keep it in our minds or whether we let it go, right? Mr. Green says, my insurance agent is going to be confused when I tell them that my house was built at the beginning of the universe. Yeah, right. Exactly.
From the very same reason.
I mean, this gets close to like one of the things I find just really sort of bizarre about the way that Craig tends to argue. So on the one hand, we're told that various non-theistic cosmological models are supposed to be bad, quote unquote, because they're overly speculative or they don't have sharply enough defined mechanisms and so on. Now, on the one hand, there is a sense in which many of those models are sharply defined.
You can have something sharply defined but lack evidence. The whole point of an argument is to show that evidence, i.e. the premises, warrant the conclusion, right? So by making the Kalam cosmological argument, he's giving evidence. He's presenting evidence for the claim that God exists, and the particular kind of God is based on the conclusion of the Kalam. So in order to have a robust argument like say for the multiverse, you need evidence to support it. But the thing is that it's just a theoretical, it's a mathematical concept. There's no, and by virtue of it being a scientific claim, it doesn't really have much to do with science, because there's nothing empirical in the observable world that we can point to and say, see, that proves that other worlds exist, because they're in our world, right? So the problem with some of these other cosmological structures or models, or however you want to, paradigms, is that it's not that they're not descript enough. It's not that they're not specific or particular enough. It's that they don't have evidence, right?
But on the other hand, I can't think of something that's less well defined than the sense in which God is supposed to have created the universe. I mean,
it's really easy. Minds create things ex nihilo. Like, that's a very simple concept.
Not only is it that we have no prior experience with something.
To say that we have no prior experience with X, Y, or Z is to presuppose the existence of X, Y, or Z.
Being an efficient cause without there being a material cause. But we have no, Craig's theology itself doesn't provide us any.
Presuppose in some sense, not in the sense of that it's true that it exists, but that it's true that it is a thing. It's true that it is a real concept in some sense. Similar to like where people go with the ontological argument for God. God is the greatest conceivable being, and you don't necessarily have to say that a greatest conceivable being exists in reality, but you do have to accept that it is a real concept. If I'm pronouncing your name wrong, just give me some grace here. But I'm assuming it's Bindi, or I'm assuming that. If God created the space-time, God created the space-time and everything in it, I would assume he can see the beginning and the end of time as the moment he created it. Therefore, one could argue that we do not have agency. Yeah, I think the main reason why this doesn't follow is that something outside of time can see the whole trajectory of an agent and all the decisions that they're going to make. That doesn't negate the fact that agents made those decisions. And then also we have descriptions in the Bible, for instance, of God creating man in his image, the Imago Dei, right? And that entails certain attributes, not necessarily physical attributes. I think the best way to characterize that is that God gave us this sort of agent causality. I think that's probably the best explanation for that. Okay, almost like when you out reactive chemicals in a test tube. The end result, or maybe when you put reactive chemicals in a test tube, the end result could be calculated. Right, and that can be true of all material things. That doesn't mean that they don't have other causes. You see what I'm saying here? Inside and outside of time. God can interact with time for sure, but God is sans time. He's not inside or outside of time. It's just time is not a thing apart from God's own creation so like God's creation of time is what time is. So it's not like he's not inside it really or outside of it. Like, I'm not inside and outside of an idea that I have in my brain. And I think the best way to look at this is the C.S. Lewis's author analogy, where he talks about, you write a book like Narnia, you have a character, let's say Lucy, she goes into the wardrobe. Does she decide to go into the wardrobe? Well, one hand, you're like, well, no, because this is just a story, but that's negating the any kind of truth about the narrative. If you accept the entailments of the narrative, then no matter how you slice it, yes, Lucy has agency. It's not like a reaction in a test tube because you're forgetting consciousness. Elements are not able to make choices. Right. Yeah, exactly. Okay. I'm going to continue on here.
Sort of mechanism by which this is supposed to happen. It's entirely underdefined in terms of how this is supposed to happen. You bring up this idea that it was supposed to have been spoken into existence. But of course, that's taken in a metaphorical sense.
Right.
And then one.
It's not a metaphorical sense, though. It literally is that it's a concept. It is literally the word,
Wonders, what is this supposed to be a metaphor for? And of course, there's just no answer.
What we're interested in is what are
not a metaphor.
the causal conditions for something that begins to exist. The fact that the things begin to exist all the time is evident, for example, from the fact that we ourselves begin to exist. I'd invite Grayson to ask himself, did he begin to exist? Does he think that he existed prior to the union of his mother's egg and his father?
Or does he think that he exists at all? That's another point, is that if you accept this reductionist, nominalist view, then you don't really exist at all. Like this, it just becomes sort of like David Hume's radical skepticism, where you're just sense impressions. And so it's not really, you're not sense impressions, it's just sense impressions happening. And the problem with this is that you have no way to get to, like he points out in his work on the science of man, as he's describing his project. He points out basically cause and effect. Those things, you can't really relate them because if we're just impressions one after the other, there's no reason to lump them together in any particular related way over any other kind of cluster of sense experience. And so it's worse even than what William Lane Craig is saying. It's not just did I begin to exist, it's do I even exist?
Other sperm? Does he think that he is past eternal, that he has always existed? Well, of course not. He began to exist at that moment of conception. And so the fact that things have material causes in addition to efficient causes is in no sense a refutation of the evident fact that things do begin to exist all around us all the time.
Grayson, again, is not arguing that nothing begins to exist. Grayson would never say that he didn't begin to exist. Instead, what Grayson would say is that he began to exist in the sense that he was created from pre-existing materials. And so this entire line of argumentation that Craig has embarked upon is just
But the problem with that is if you're going to say, oh, I'm just pre-existing materials, then how, in what way did you begin to exist? Like, in what way does that even make sense to say I begin to exist, but I'm just really all the atoms that were already there? Was it so the atoms had to be arranged? They had to have a form? Oh, interesting. That means that you can't have a reductionist view about yourself and your identity. Oh, they have teleology, they have function. Oh, that's interesting. Now you have to say, where did that function come from? It can't come from just the reductionist view. It has to come from a mind, right? So this is the problem, is they're making these distinctions, but they're not clear. They're not clear distinctions.
apply to a straw man.
Yeah, right. And I don't. So I haven't watched the Grayson video in full, but I did watch a relevant portion, Dan, that you sent me, where Grayson, he explicitly says that when, I think this is almost a quote from Grayson, he said it's around the 4-minute, 30-second mark. He says, when we say that something begins to exist, we mean that it was produced by pre-existent materials. And of course, Grayson is arguing that his chair was in fact produced by pre-existing materials.
Right.
So he is saying that things begin.
Point.
Yeah, he is saying that things begin to exist. We have him committing himself to saying that things.
But yes, then in what way do they begin to exist, right? Because if they just exist from pre-existing materials, then what it seems arbitrary. Like why ought this particular group of atoms mean a chair or a watch or a microphone or a camera or a water bottle, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Why ought these mean actual things, whereas beforehand they didn't actually have any function, they didn't have any form? Like take all the components, break all the components down of a watch, right? Just give me all the chemicals in a watch. And based on the laws of physics and the chemistry, can I know that it has a form? Can I know that it has function? Can I know that a watch is working just from the chemicals? Because a broken watch has the same chemicals as a working watch, right? So there's something particular about the structure of a watch that makes it work, that makes it what we call a working watch. So they're trying to collapse this sort of higher level of reality into just the reductionist view, but you can't do that. Got some comments here. Let me take a look. Back to the free will stuff. Even if he knows my choice, I don't see how it wasn't my choice. Still, exactly right. Well, if you think of a quantum collapse, the cloud already existed prior to the collapsing particle. Perhaps the soul is like a cloud, and the body like the particle. Oh, you're saying basically there is real emergence, right? But then you can be a naturalist still, I suppose, but you can't be a materialist, you can't be a reductionist, because they're going to have to say that this is an artificial sort of emergence. But yeah, I suppose, but at that point you're already invoking some kind of mind. So why exclude that as a causal reality? You know, why try to make these weird distinctions?
Do in fact begin to exist. So I just want to say that for the audience. But let's continue on with Craig.
Begin to exist all around us all the time.
Oh, by the way, that reminds me. I don't know if any of you have seen this interview with Alex O'Connor and Michael from the popular Vsauce the Science channel. They do talk about sort of this idea of, well, Michael doesn't think that a chair actually exists. So he's sort of a, I guess, I think it's called like an object nihilist or something like that. I think that would be the correct classical term. Not necessarily a nominalist, but there is sort of an aspect of nominalism that's sort of hidden behind those assumptions, right? Yes, counter arguments are always welcome here, and feel free to come up. I'm nice. I'm not gonna berate you. I'll listen to your arguments, right? I'm not here to tell you that my way is the right way. It's like my way or the highway. That's not what this channel is about, right? Okay. Continuing on.
And here's the next clip. He goes on to premise number 2, gets into the Big Bang.
Now, what about premise 2, right? Premise 2 was that the universe began to exist. Now, on its face of it, a lot of people might have learned about the Big Bang as being the beginning of the universe. But does the Big Bang...
But notice, okay, so far, we've gotten through premise 1. We've gotten through all the rebuttals that they've had for premise 1 so far. And they might have more. I haven't seen this beforehand. But notice they haven't actually debunked, they haven't discredited the argument whatsoever. And maybe they do it elsewhere, and it seems like they talk about it. They have maybe made some articles and stuff, and we can look at that. That would be good to look at. But I think so far, if they're claiming in this video to rebut William Lane Craig based on the science, they have yet to do so. So let's listen in.
Actually make any such claim. When you get right down to it, most theoretical physicists, astrophysicists, and cosmologists agree that it does not. The Big Bang does not make any claims about where the starting energy of the universe came from. It starts at the initial condition of the universe existing in a very, very small, very, very dense, very, very hot state. In fact, the actual physics that we need to describe this state break down, and we're no longer able to describe the very, very small.
So physics entirely break down. So that where does naturalism go from there then, right?
Hottest, densest states about what is actually physically going on. So without that more advanced physics necessary to describe what's going on, you really cannot make any assertive claim about any kind of beginnings. It's only intellectually honest to be agnostic.
Wait. No. That's not the only argument. That's not the only argument for this. So you've got the boundary theorem, right? You've got the second law of thermodynamics. You have particular philosophical arguments, like logical arguments, like the Grim Reaper paradox, and you have this sort of like Apollo and the hare kind of paradox. Basically, you can't have finite, infinite chains. You can have infinite chains, right? You can have infinite chains in the sense of something outside of time, outside of matter, outside of space. You just can't have them finite, because what happens? You have this continual succession of events, and we're, say, in a particular event, but that event should have already happened because there was an infinite amount of time prior to that finite event, right? So where do we end up? We end up in no space, no time, and we thus or cannot be any kind of material in that space, right? Because it doesn't exist. So we're like the finitude of life in itself breaks down the concept of infinite causal chains in a finite world, right? That's the whole point of infinite. It's not finite. Jason Stafford 360 says, well, like the breath breathe in and out, and the ebb and flow of the sea's tides, based on the fractal nature of the universe, I would guess the Big Bang follows the same pattern. See, the problem with that is that what we've discovered is that the Big Bang, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be the start of the universe, but the Big Bang shows that the universe is a finite event, right? Can you have an infinite chain of Big Bangs, right? If you're going to say that physics breaks down, time and space are weird at the start of the beginning of the universe, it's like, can you even call it a beginning? It's this sort of like ethereal thing. We're looking at the quantum fluctuations, the quantum vacuum, and we're just sort of like making this sort of mystical religion out of it. And that's fine, but you're not a naturalist anymore. You're not a naturalist anymore. You believe in the universe is your God, essentially. Like there's no empirical evidence for this. You're just accepting that on faith. In fact, all the philosophical paradoxes, all the theorems of the finitude of the universe, such as like the boundary theorem, or we see like the cosmic microwave background radiation, or we see redshift, etc. All these things that indicate that the universe is finite, all the philosophy and the metaphysics that shows that finite universes cannot be infinite because they're finite, right? Because that would cause a lot of logical contradictions to happen, right? And then we also see, second law of thermodynamics, like the universe is decaying over time. So are we going to say that all physics just breaks down? Then you've abandoned naturalism. You've abandoned naturalism at that point. Then what's the point? What's the point in not accepting God if you do have supernatural things happening, apparently at the beginning of the universe? And it's just going to be, there's not going to be any evidence for rejecting God. It's just going to be the basis on, it's just going to be, I just deny God on the grounds that I don't like God, or like I don't prefer God, but not on any inferential grounds. Like, so you've lost that argument. You've lost that argument because, I mean, even the naturalists, like if you look at Lucretius, even the ancient philosophical naturalists of like the classical Greek antiquity, they still, I mean, they still believed in an infinite universe, but we can't anymore. The evidence is the evidence is in on this. There are finite events, so we've only lived long enough to see the expansion, maybe, ? And it's exactly that expansion that the boundary theorem, by nature of like just mathematical proofs, shows that means that the universe is in its totality finite. This could be why people say you can't ever see the face of God. Oh. I'm not sure what that's responding to. Wouldn't usable energy still run down? Exactly, yeah, that's second law. Well, if our life was only a nanosecond and we were looking at a collapsing quantum cloud suborbital, we would / could assume it was finite. I don't know if you meant to say that, but I think I probably agree with that. But in fact, the cloud can collapse and expand infinitely? ? That is a good question mark. I'm not denying God. I think everything is God. Right. Okay. So then you're just probably more aligned with someone like Spinoza, like a panentheist, who's going to say that the universe is just modes of the attributes of God. Okay, so then you accept the argument. You accept that God exists, and then we just need to fuss out the details about what that entails, right? Is each universe different or the same? Where's the usable energy coming from? Yeah, that's a good question. Like, does physics just break down conveniently when the universe is gone? And then when a new universe is constructed, it's a new physics or something like that. Yeah, and where's the energy coming from? Because the last universe doesn't have the energy. God, as in all-powerful creator, or God like we are all one. I think the problem with the view of God, as being something like we are all one, we are all God, is that if we are all God, then none of us are differentiated in any way. I think the only plausible case in which that's not so, like, that would be a pantheistic view. The only plausible case in which you could say that we are all God is if we are all part of God, if we are modes of God, like Spinoza's view. But then that has a lot of problems too. But he, interestingly, in his work, he actually uses the ontological argument for the existence of God. I think he makes some interesting conclusions about the ontological argument, in which that'd be good for another time. But I think he makes some errors there. Let's continue on.
Or theories today point to a beginning of the universe. And again, most cosmologists would agree with this.
So is agnosticism about the Big Bang the best option, Bill?
Well, I think that Grayson is simply wrong, that most cosmologists agree that the universe did not begin to exist. I wonder what is his basis for saying that? Why should we believe him in this regard? I noticed that Stephen Hawking and Roger Penrose, two of the greatest physicists of all time, in their co-authored book, The Nature of Space and Time, published by Princeton University Press, have the following to say, and I quote, "Almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang."
Okay, so this quote is extremely dodgy for a number of reasons. Firstly, so it's true that quote is in that book, and that book is is authored by Hawking and Penrose. What Craig doesn't tell you is that it was a debate between Hawking and Penrose, right? So that quote comes from Hawking, don't come from Penrose. So it's sort of dodgy for him to attribute it to Hawking and Penrose. But moreover,
that doesn't really change the point, though. It's like one of the two prominent physicists that write the book believe in a finite. And actually, if you look at Roger Penrose's stuff, he does also believe in a finite universe. So this is kind of a moot point, and it feels like posturing a little bit to me.
Of course. Now, at the time, to be fair to Craig, at the time, probably Penrose did agree with Hawking. But we all know, surely Craig knows, that Penrose changed his mind, right?
Okay. So let's look at some comments here. The energy exists everywhere in the ether, but it takes specific geometric structures to investigate flow, such as DNA, which is based on the pent and the hex. That's interesting. So that seems sort of in the spiritualism kind of approach. That also feels very Hegelian, in my opinion. Sort of like the Ubermensch kind of, like we're part of this human race which was created by the universe to discover itself, to discover God, which is the universe, right? I think this adds a weight of evidence to the angel Lucifer, who I think the Bible says was the designer. Verse for that. I don't see that being substantiated. 9-inch Anton. I don't know. Don't know what. Let's keep going.
And Penrose now thinks that the universe doesn't have a beginning. And it's not
This particular universe. Well, actually, no, that's not. Isn't his view the sort of like universes like expand and contract? It's sort of like the bouncing universe kind of thing.
Just as a point of clarification, so at the time when that book was published in 1996, Hawking did not think that the universe had a beginning, right? So the claim that Hawking has made here is just a claim about what it is that a community of people believe, and not a claim about what either Hawking or Penrose themselves believe.
No, but he is attributing it to Hawking and Penrose, and he said, these are two of the greatest physicists of all time. So he is using their authority, right? I don't know if they're of all time. I mean, they're certainly very highly respected physicists.
I mean, they're very influential physicists. I think certainly in the modern age. I mean, if we're minus like, say, someone like Einstein, or I don't know how far you want to go back, Newton, Kepler, etc.
Penrose has got a Nobel Prize. Hawking, of course, is a great physicist. Yeah, but anyway, he's using their authority, right? And if we can use their authority,
that's not exactly what's happening. So he's just trying to appeal to, there is a sort of standard consensus. There's a standard view about reality in which the universe has a beginning, and that's not necessarily. It could be controversial, but that's not necessarily like anathema for a physicist. At the very least, it's not anathema for a physicist. And I think if that lowest common denominator is true, Craig's point still stands. So I mean, all of this is kind of debating around the Kalam. None of this is actually getting to the Kalam.
To establish a beginning, then I can use Penrose's authority to establish the opposite, because he doesn't now think that the universe.
And again, that's not what's happening here. But I see where he thinks that there's a paradox.
Right, so I could just flip his argument against him. But most importantly, what I think is really important is the date of that. Now, I think the debate happened in 1994.
Yes, it is.
94, and it got published a bit later, a year or two later. But the important thing is that if you read the book, Hawking basically says, well, we've got these singularity theorems. They prove the universe has a beginning, but he concedes that, we need a quantum cosmology. And he says, I don't think string theory is going to change the conclusion of the beginning. But no one had constructed a model of cosmology using string theory at that time. But a few years later, they had started to do so. And not just, I don't know why Hawking only mentioned string theory, because there were other competitive quantum gravity theories like loop quantum gravity or causal sets. But certainly people have constructed models of the Big Bang using these ideas. Now, I'm not trying to say these are right. These are just sort of ideas people are kicking around. But they imply actually the universe, many of them imply that the universe doesn't have a beginning. So,
yeah, and most of these are mathematical models that they work just fine. They work just fine on paper. I mean, you can get a model to work fine on paper pretty easily. The problem is, like, we're looking for evidence, right? what is the evidence for this model? And the problem is a lot of, especially secular physicists, are going to be looking specifically for ways to get around the designer hypothesis, right? They're looking for, how can I show in some way that the universe is infinite? Like, who is it? Lawrence Krauss, I believe, says like all we need for the universe is gravity, and then everything else can come out of that, right? Or there are other people that are like, well, if we have like this quantum vacuum, quantum field fluctuation, that can just sort of be an infinite thing. The problem with that is it's part of the universe, right? It's something we observe in the universe, for sure. Otherwise, how would we know about it? It's not like a multiverse hypothesis. It's really something we can test. The problem with that then is, if it's something in the universe, it's finite. And so you don't actually get around any of the problems with finite things not being able to create infinite causal chains. So you have that problem still. So the question is, what are you going to do with that? Because that is a serious problem, right? You can develop a mathematical model on paper. Any physicist can do that, right? Any non-physicist really could do that. But like to have it substantiated by evidence, that's a whole different project. I think the reason why there are so many models is precisely because there isn't good evidence for any of them. So, Jason Stafford, he's quoting Ezekiel. Okay, so thou hast been in Eden, in the garden of God. Every precious stone was thy covering. The workmanship of thy tabrets and of thy pipes was prepared in the day that thou wast created. So is that sorry, is that for the sort of Lucifer hypothesis of creation? And how would you connect that? What's the warrant, right? I'm confused how you're exegeting anything about Lucifer from that verse. Okay, we're going to move on.
Certainly didn't begin at the Big Bang. So this quote is not only sort of incorrectly attributed to Hawking and Penrose when it was really just Hawking, but the date is really, really relevant because things changed in the late 90s and the early 2000s. In particular, we found that one of the conditions of the theorem, the Penrose-Hawking theorem that's supposed to prove the universe had a beginning, was actually violated. Observationally, we have evidence that it's violated. That condition is basically that, well, it's an energy condition, but you can put it in English, plain English, as just saying gravity is always attractive. So when we found the universe is accelerating expansion, we had evidence that that's not true. I mean, people had proposed inflation before that would also violate that condition. So in the late 90s, we really had very strong evidence that one of the conditions of the theorem wasn't true. But also then they start in the late 90s, also in early 2000s, people started to develop cosmological models based on quantum gravity ideas. And they seem to imply the Big Bang wasn't at the beginning. Moreover, in the 80s, the only quantum cosmology models that we had, so before 1994, when that quote was made, were models like the Hartle-Hawking model and the Vilenkin tunneling from nothing model, which can be interpreted as having a beginning, or at least the past is finite. Right. But then we've got these other models that sort of had a different conclusion, and so again, the date is really important here. The last point I'll make about this quote is that Craig can't really help himself to Hawking here, because what happened was Hawking sort of had these singularity theorems, and then he agreed that we need a quantum update because general relativity is probably inapplicable in this high density regime. So Hawking constructed a model called the Hartle-Hawking model with Jim Hartle, and Hawking interpreted that model as having a beginning. Okay, but the model has sort of two types of time in it, like real time, the sort of time that you're familiar with.
Oh yeah,
imaginary time.
Imaginary
as well.
time, right?
So imaginary time is, you might have heard of the fact that there are, if you take the square root of 9, right? The square root of 9 is 3, and it's also -3, right? There are no numbers that that everyday people will be familiar with that square to a negative number. If you take -3 times -3, you get +9. plus 3 times plus 3 is plus 9, right? You don't get -9. So imaginary numbers are numbers that mathematicians have sort of developed that do give you a negative number. So when you square them. So these are imaginary numbers. Now, the beginning in the Hartle-Hawking model is in imaginary time. If you follow it in real time, it doesn't have a beginning, right? Now, Craig thinks that imaginary time is physically unintelligible. That's his main critique of the Hartle-Hawking model. So he can't help himself to Hawking's quote, right, as saying, I think the universe had a beginning.
How is it not unintelligible? You know, it's like, it's kind of silly. It's kind of silly to say, oh, okay, yeah. Real time had a beginning, but imaginary time. It's like, okay, we're dipping our toes now out of naturalism and into some sort of weird, dualistic, kind of like spiritualistic thing. This isn't science anymore. We're like, to say that time has a beginning, but also imaginary time doesn't have a beginning. That's about this. That's about the equivalent in the material world of saying that, like, I can't have, like, I can have a negative number of things, right? Like he's talking about imaginary numbers. Like, I can have a negative number of things. No, I can't. Like, you can be in debt, right? But like, even that's not saying that you have a negative number of things. That's saying you have a deficit. So like this whole point of like this analogy between like imaginary numbers, imaginary time, that just shows that neither of them really exist in the physical world. We're talking about the physical world. That's what we need to explain the creation of, right? We don't need to explain the creation of things that are imaginary because they're imaginary, right? Except that we can explain the things that are imaginary via a mind. And if these things don't exist in material, that just creates a serious problem for the naturalist. Because now we have immaterial things created ex nihilo by minds in our everyday observation. And so that should give any kind of naturalist pause, I think.
Right? Because he can't consistently do that. Just to say, it's not just me sort of saying this. There's a quote here from Aaron Wall. Aaron Wall,
isn't time a human construct? Depends on how you're defining time, right? If you're defining time as like hours and seconds, days, weeks, months, then yeah, time. Well, to an extent, everything is a human construct because everything is contingent on a mind to be cognizant of it, right? Like, even if you think about like that whole oh, I forget who talks about this. Is it it's one of the modern philosophers. Maybe someone knows. But if a tree falls down in the forest, does it make a sound? That's the question, right? Well, if no one's there to hear it, then no, it doesn't actually make a sound, because a sound is a perception. A sound is something that a brain is mindful of. So if a brain is not mindful of any kind of sound, then how does anything make a sound, right? And in the same way, and that's not to say there isn't a reality of an actual tree falling down and actual like waves of vibration in the air, right? But there's nothing there to process it. There's no sound being made. If there's nothing there, no one there to hear it, and then maybe you want to extend that to animals, extend it to the wildlife in the forest. Like, if there's nothing there except for the trees, ignoring for a second that in some sense trees are sensitive to sound as well. Like, does it make a sound? No, because sound is contingent on a mind, right? And in the same way, time is contingent on a mind. That doesn't negate its reality, but time is a perception in some sense. In another sense, it is real. You know, it is real because we observe it, and it's outside of whether we have any kind of propositional view on it. Frank says, Genesis 1 says that God created man. Genesis 1:27 says, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, or created him. Male and female created them. He created them. Yep. So, and and I guess this is just responding to the whole debate that's going on with whether Lucifer is the creative being here. So if you accept that the Bible is true, no, it's generally not a belief that you can derive Lucifer as some sort of creator figure. Jason writes, if the colors of light we see are a result, maybe, of the tetrahedron, 7 axis of spin, and Lucifer was the light bearer, then maybe these concepts are connected. And I think, okay, so this is a big, and I don't mean this to insult you, Jason, but I've been noticing a lot online this sort of this disposition for a sort of conspiratorial mindset where we can pick out of context pieces of evidence. Some people are like, you can call that cherry picking, and it's basically like we're pattern seeking, we're pattern recognizing, and so we take two things and we're like, oh yeah, these are connected. And the problem is, if you're not model testing, then you can just do that ad infinitum, and it doesn't matter how many of them get knocked down, you're always going to have a particular belief. You actually need to test a model. You need something that's falsifiable. So it's hard to just respond with and engage with particular, like, oh, you can see how this connects to this and this connects to this. That's actually not going to get you very far. Spoken to the king of Tyre in poetic language, thou sealest up the sum, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. See, like, and maybe there's more detail here on how this could be sort of tied together, but like I'm not seeing any kind of warrant for this view. Beauty is geometric. I don't know, it can be, right? Then again, there's something to be said about sort of like the sort of uncanniness of seeing depictions of life as super geometrical. It's not necessarily that. There are definitely geometric forms and symmetry, but if things are too geometrical, it can feel unnatural at times. Color is just a perception and changes with different perceptors. Exactly. God can't be seen. Only faith can deliver you to him. Yeah, I think it's important to understand the significance of faith in one's epistemology. If it's the whole kind of like, I don't know, I was gonna, hopefully, I don't know if Sam will be here, but hopefully on one of these next few live streams, Sam can hop on and we can talk about tag. But it's the whole premise of like the transcendental argument, right? It's that we all have these presuppositions. We all have this a priori knowledge. We have these faculties. All these things need to be assumed. We just need to accept things like the law of identity, causal laws. Like I said earlier, David Hume, when he's trying to explain reality and he's trying to create the science of man, he realizes, he stops right at, oh crap, we can't have causal laws. That's not good. We can't derive that from the empirical world. So now what do we do? Oh, I guess we just throw everything out, right? It's like we can't really have a science of man. That's basically the conclusion of his work, is that not his earlier work, but as soon as Reed starts pressing him and he makes his oh, I forget what it's called. It's about the science of man. I'll have to find the book and share it at some point. But yeah, as soon as he starts talking about, how do we derive a priori from the, and it's interesting because he already kind of assumes a priori right from the outset when he's like, all that exists are sense experiences, right, and ideas. It's like, as soon as you have these two things, sense experiences and ideas, and within those things, you're already assuming laws of identity. You're assuming the causal relationship between the sense input and the thing in itself, as Kant says, right? So you're already taking all these presuppositions in, even with something as limited as this radical skepticism that David Hume has. So I mean, this is a whole problem, right? We have to have faith. We have to have faith. We have to just take things as our first principles. We can't operate otherwise. That doesn't mean it's without evidence, and you can certainly judge two different kinds of faith, and you can look at two different worldviews and look at the mainly biological coherence, right? Which one is fitting the evidence better that I observe here, out here, and in here, right? Is it more logical? Is it more true to like mathematical principles? Is it more true to moral principles? And then you also have to have, is it true to like the empirical world? Is it true to the evidence that's available? But you have to also keep in mind that we don't have any certainty. We don't have certainty of the things that we have to just accept. For instance, like we have to accept that our cognitive faculties really are getting at some sort of truth in reality. Then we have to accept things like inferential knowledge, and you have like the problem of what is it? The problem of induction, and Karl Popper talks about this, right? With like all swans are white. Like scientists are going into Europe, biologists are going into Europe, naturalists, and they're taking account of all the swans in Europe, and then they're realizing, oh, we noticed this rule, and it follows that all swans are white. And then later, it's discovered in places like Australia, oh wait, there are black swans. So like all our inferences completely break down. They completely break down as soon as you have one counterexample. But you can't prove a negative, right? In a particular sense, you can't prove a negative. You can kind of prove a negative postulate, but you can't prove that something that our experience shows is true is false until you have an example of. You can definitely falsify it, but that's different, right? You can definitely falsify it, but that's a whole different object. I've got a lot of comments here. I always think of the chicken and the egg. If the universe had to have been created by God, then God must have a creator. So the whole point of chicken and egg examples is that they both need to be created simultaneously. They need to be coexistent, right? Which do you have first, the chicken or the egg? You have to have them both, right? Maybe God has infinitely higher creators. So I mean that the problem with that is having a creator implies contingency, which implies finitude, and then you create a finite infinite chain. And the problem with that is you can't have a finite infinite chain, right? It's the turtles all the way down. It just doesn't work, right? Yes. Yeah, infinite regresses. Yeah. And that's a logical contradiction. If it's finite, right? If that regress is finite, then it's a logical contradiction. If it's infinite, then in some sense you could say it's fine. However, infinite things don't have a cause. So in some sense, like maybe it's kind of irrelevant to say you can have infinite causal chains. Interesting. This channel should be called the Brain Gym. That's funny. Then we had an infinite amount of time that has already passed. So why are we here now? Right. God created man in his own image. If you want to know God, know yourself. I think that's true in a lot of ways, but I also think it's hard to know in a painting, for instance, if you don't know much about the painter. And that's not just talking about like a modern art piece, right? Because there are some pieces that are just so abstract that they don't really have any meaning in and of themselves until you understand the intent behind it, right? But really, it comes down to everything that has intent behind it. If you don't know what the intent is, and then this is where revelation comes in. You need to have revelation to have a coherent understanding of yourself. If we are made in God's image, that's why I think things like presup are probably good arguments, because they're showing, because of revelation of the Old and New Testament, that there is a logical coherency to Christianity, whereas other, say, spiritual religions where you don't have any kind of revelation, you're going to run into the corner of, well, yes, I should have revelation because that would be logically coherent if we're created as part of God or as aspects of God, but we don't. And then what does that mean? That means, like Sam was talking about, God is deceptive, right? Is a circle finite or infinite? It depends on what you mean and what you're defining as a circle. But if you're talking about the abstract concept of a circle, it's finite, right? Because where does a circle exist? It has to exist contingently. So the question is, like, if something like a circle has to exist contingently, and it doesn't exist in our minds, then there needs to be some sort of mind that can ground a circle. And a theist is going to say that's God. That's God. Or is it complete? Oh, what are you getting at here? Maybe you can elaborate. Yes, but the painting in this case was created in the same image of the creator. Right, and to a certain extent, you can have a sort of like a self-portrait, a mural, or not a mural, a self-portrait, a sort of like just like, I don't know, you're looking at yourself in the mirror, and then you just sort of like trace it down. But even that has intent behind it, and you might not know all the intent just from the image itself. And I mean, you definitely don't know, because that image in itself can only communicate so much information, right? I can write a book, right? I can write a whole book about myself, like a autobiography, right? But that whole book is not going to contain everything about myself, or even everything that I remember about myself. Yeah, much less everything about myself, A circle has no beginning and no end. Only in its circularity. In a different sense, yeah, sure. Does a circle have a beginning as it's being created? Yeah, that's the question, right? If God created man in his own image, what about the universe? Yeah, he created the universe. According to the Kalam, according to many of the arguments that I've presented on this channel, according to those, God created the universe. Is that what you're getting at? He didn't create the universe in his image in the same sense, right? And he never reveals that about the universe, right? In the creation account, he's creating the universe for us. He's creating it for there's some sort of sense in which, if you take an argument like the fine tuning, you have to say that the universe was created specifically for us because it's conducive to our own thriving, right? And maybe not now as much as it could have been in the past. I think that there's a large role in which entropy and things degrading has to do with much of the criticism of the fine tuning in some sense, but God created the universe, and the universe created us, or at least we came out of it. I think that's so that's sort of like a part to the whole fallacy, right? God created the universe, and the universe created us. Oh, sorry, no, I was reading that wrong. My bad, my mistake. So God created the universe created us, or at least we came out of the universe. I mean, you can hold that view. Yeah, I don't think that there's anything inconsistent with that. Do you? The universe has creative power. Questions. Missed the second part. Yeah, probably the same as me. Let's continue. Let's not get so sidetracked.
It's a Christian theoretical physicist, and this is what he said about this. He goes, the supposed beginning of time, this is a quote now, sorry, open quote, the supposed beginning of time actually occurs at values of the time parameter that are imaginary. If you only think about values of t which are real, most calculations seem to indicate with high probability you get a universe which is eternal in both directions. Now, later on, he sort of accused people of saying that the Hartle-Hawking model had a beginning were lying, or I think he said, well, they're not really lying, but the end result is the same. I'm sure their motives are as clear as a driven stuff. He's very, critical of people saying the Hartle-Hawking model has a beginning. So, but of course, this is what's implied. It didn't say explicitly, Craig, but by quoting Hawking, I think this is implied. So those three sort of major problems with this quote. Now, if you want, I can play you lots of cosmologists saying we don't believe, that singularity is real, that we don't, that it basically completely confirms what Grayson says. So it's up to you, Joe, whether you want to play these clips or here's a few things. So let's start with Penrose.
Certainly a view quite commonly expressed now that we shouldn't simply.
And again, like they already pointed out, this is a logical fallacy. It's an appeal to authority fallacy, right? It's sort of like, or even like a sort of like bandwagon fallacy. It's like we have a lot of people that believe this X, Y, Z. Therefore we must believe it. Like that doesn't follow. If every single physicist, and it's definitely the case that it's not every single physicist, right? It wouldn't be every single physicist, but if every single physicist believed that the universe was infinite, that wouldn't make the universe infinite. None of them have the ability to, just by believing in something, make it so. So we decide things like this based on the evidence. So it's fine. He's gonna play a few physicists, and I'm gonna let it play.
Give up that the Big Bang is a singularity, that we need a theory which describes that. Most people would say it's a form of quantum gravity. I have a view which is different from that, but nevertheless,
that's what it's called. It's the conformal cyclic cosmology. It's sort of like the bouncing. Is that the which one is that? Is that the one that's like sort of like it bounces, the universe constantly is expanding and then retracting back into itself? Is that right?
I have in common with that we need a new theory.
The real lesson of the singularity theorems is therefore that we need to combine the general theory of relativity with quantum theory in order to understand the origin of the universe.
What is called.
So that doesn't say that he's saying that the universe isn't finite. He's talking about the origin of the universe, right? That already implies that the universe is not infinite. So I think they're conflating the origin of the Big Bang with the origin of the universe. I think these are two different discussions here. And I think this is part of the philosophical problem of both Grayson Hawk and these three gentlemen, is that they're all claiming that we're saying that the Big Bang is the beginning of the universe, right? In their model, or whatever model you want to use. However, that's not what William Lane Craig is saying. Like, that's kind of strawmanning his position. That's not what I'm saying. In fact, most people presenting the Kalam, if not all people presenting the Kalam, are all going to say the Big Bang is not the start of the universe. The Big Bang implies a start to the universe. Two different things here.
The standard Big Bang cosmology, which was a hot Big Bang, right? You start with a very hot, dense universe, and which begins at singularity.
Got some comments here that I want to respond to. Okay. Gosh, how far? Do we have creative power? I'd say emphatically yes. And what does that mean? That means that agents have the ability to enact their will on reality. And I think that's what it means to be creative. The sun created the elements and continues to do so. That is a open question. I think you still have to explain the existence of heavy elements. I don't think that's sufficient. I don't think that's sufficient, but we can talk about that. You created that sentence. Yeah. Maybe creativity is embedded in God's creation. And that's totally plausible, right? It's totally plausible that, and I think it's true that God has embedded an ability to respond to environment in biology, right? I think there are natural processes that bring about specific particular changes that God intends, right? I don't see any problem with this view. I don't see any problem with this view at all, really. Hello, Rebecca. How you doing? Hope you're well. Does the sun make elements, or do reactions happen? Yeah, in this case, it would be reactions happen, and then the make aspect is going to have to involve some sort of. There's going to have to be some sort of higher explanation for why particular reactions are happening, right? Which is going to be the sort of the bigger question of what the Kalam is trying to get at. Like, what is the first cause? Are Hindus sinners? My friend is a Hindu, and I don't want her going to hell. All of us have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Is what our revelation in the Bible says. So the answer to that is yes. We're all sinners. But I think I sort of take a existentialist Kierkegaardian view. I think that there are people that can potentially be saved in various religions, in spite of what they believe. They could still be, in a real sense, worshiping the real God, just in the same way that say one of the Pharisees believes that they're worshiping the real God, whereas they know they have revelation about the real God, but they're worshiping an idol. Right. I think that given we get life from the planet, light. Oh, life. Yeah. Life from the planet, and the light comes from the sun. I think it would be naive to assume they are dead entities floating in space. So the sun is a dead entity? You think it would be naive to assume that? Why? And what do you mean by dead, right? Dead as in like inactive, or dead as in not living, as in like biologically speaking? Because I don't think the sun is a biological entity, but also don't think it's like not active. So it depends on what you mean. Thoughts are electric in nature, and the blood contains iron, like the core of the planet and the nature of the sun. Thoughts are light. Thoughts are light, huh? Okay. Then you should be able to tell me like what is the precise idea I have based on the quantity and the relationship between light particles, right? I think that's the whole point of the problem of like the hard problem of consciousness, is that we've not been able to do that. I don't believe we get life from the planet. Abiogenesis has never been demonstrated. So we could live without the food it produces. What produces? So I'm confused about this. without the gravity of the moon and the light of the sun. Well, yeah, these things are conducive for life. It doesn't make them life in themselves, right? I don't know exactly if that's your argument, but dead as in not conscious. I think the sun is conscious, like an eye in the sky. I think it's hard to tell what even consciousness is. I don't think you can say it is something material, right? Is AI conscious? Like, if AI works in a way in which, similar to the brain, you have this sort of neural network that's happening, then it should be able to have agency at this point. I mean, like, it has the majority of information that's stored online, so it should be able to have some sort of sense of agency. Yet we don't observe agency. We don't observe agency in AI. It's a tool, really. It's not a thinking being. Could it be? And I'm even skeptical of that. So I think actually is you'd be hard pressed to show that it's the neurons or it's the electricity that is conscious. I think that can store information, and I think that's what it is. It's memory, right? Memory, it stores information. It helps you access things. It's a way of organizing. It's a way of facilitating the mind. It's not the mind. And I have arguments for that. If you want to come up and discuss this, I'd be totally down. Every living thing has embedded information that didn't arise naturally. Yep, precisely. Okay, we're going to continue now.
So that picture, I don't think anybody believes.
I don't think anybody believes that the universe started off with the singularity. That just tells us that Einstein's classical theory of general relativity breaks down. So that classical theory of gravity doesn't apply when you get to very high energies. So it's replaced by some...
Did he mean Einstein, or did he mean like Newtonian theory? Or is he talking about general relativity breaks down? I don't see how does general relativity break down in the quantum vacuum?
Quantum theory, consistent quantum theory of gravity. String theory is a candidate for a theory like this.
Was that a big...
Again, they're offering, and this is the whole point. They're offering candidates. They're not like, what I would like to see personally is, where's the evidence? Where's the evidence here, right? Are you saying that DNA does not evolve? Who are you responding to here? DNA does not evolve. What do you mean by that? I would think that evolution is the act of embedding additional information. Where's the information coming from? See, the problem is that you don't actually have a mechanism of adding additional information within the theory of evolution. You have a process of random copying errors and natural selection, and the question is that sufficient to actually account for the information that we have? And generally the point here is that if we look at things like the sticky globule problems, what I've heard it called as, but it's also related to like protein entropy. It's basically this, is that gene families, there is room for variation there, right? There's room for particular nucleotides to change, sort of like substitutions and stuff like that. And there's room for sort of like switching out sort of like recombination and other events that allow for this like preservation of and this facilitating of genes and gene families. But then the question is, gene folding structures, what do we know about them? We know that they can break down really easily. And when they break down, because they're sort of hydrophobic, they create these, they kind of like fold in on themselves in proper way, and they become really sticky, and they start sticking to the surfaces of the cell. They start sticking to all the other mechanisms of the cell. And basically, apoptosis has to happen, where the cell has to kill itself, because it has to either it expends a lot of energy getting rid of these things, and this is what causes all these illnesses, such as like like what was it called? Is it Osberg? Yeah, it's like the particular like forms of like memory loss or forms of autism and things like that can happen just because your cells are expending so much information on trying to repair these. And then here's the problem: is that like genes exist on fitness landscapes. What does that mean? There are mountains of fitness, and then there are these steep, pretty much insurmountable, insurpassable gaps between different gene families. And so what does that mean for evolution? They have to say all the genes that, like pretty much all, like a couple thousand of all the gene families that have ever existed in the very first populations, the very first Luca, the last universal common ancestor. And if that's the case, then what information really is evolution accounting for? Right? And there are a whole bunch of points that I could get to about this. And if you want to have a conversation about evolution, I'd be happy to. But the basic gist is you cannot account for information via natural processes, because natural processes don't in and of themselves have any kind of higher mind quality. They don't have any kind of intentional quality. It's entirely guesswork. It's entirely random chance. And I know that sounds like a straw man, but we can get into exactly what the processes of evolution mean and how they work. Natural selection is not sufficient to select for good information over bad information to the level which the process is needed to. And then you have other things like genetic drift and genetic draft and other things in which it makes the selection process even more random. So you really are talking about a random process, and you're expecting a random process to account for any kind of information. And we know that's just not mathematically plausible at all. But the random errors occur because of conscious choices that were made. No, the random errors occur because of physical processes, specifically chemical reactions. And these are deterministic. Even though they happen in a sense randomly, like you roll the dice and then you randomly land on a side, but all the sides are determined because just like the actual physical constraints of the die, there's 6 possible places it can land. And based on the kind of like the strength of the roll and where it's positioned and everything, it's determined. It is determined. It's only random in the sense that we can't predict it because it's so computationally vast, right? But yeah, it's totally chemically determined. Like, and we know like mutational hotspots are a thing because of specific structural points, structural weak spots in the folding of genomes. Would the random error have occurred had the mating not occurred? Was the mating a choice? So yeah, the random errors would have occurred because it's not during mating that random errors occur in the germline. It's during the duplication process. It's during the construction of the sperm and egg cells, right? It's during that meiosis process, right? Sorry, gonna go to the side tangent. I think I want to continue this, but I think I'm probably going to conclude this stream for the day. Unless anyone wants to come up and have a conversation on the stream, I think I'm going to be ending. So appreciate everyone for watching, and God bless, and I'll see you next time. Take care.